Welcome to the It's Time podcast with your host, Professor Dale Feinauer, from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.
Welcome to another podcast, the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs. Once again, we hope to be adding some fuel to your leadership fire. Very excited today. We have Holly Lifke here, who is the Executive Vice President of Human Resources and also has responsibility for some strategy stuff within Boldt Construction. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit, what does that mean to be head of HR, but you somehow connect into strategy? Well, I thought you were just supposed to hire people.
Yeah, that's what people not in HR think. That's very simple. People are the strategy. What we talk about at Boldt is the idea that buildings are almost the result of what we really do. And that's helping people really build and meet their dreams. So people are the focus of what we do. We can't bring buildings out of the ground unless we have people. In the past, Boldt hadn't really had a strategic approach to people. And that was why I was blessed enough to have the opportunity to help bring a strategic view of that. So to me, you can't separate strategy and people.
Because what I'm hearing is in the end result, it is the people that drive the strategy, make the strategy happen, execute it.
It's all about relationships and service. If we don't have people that understand and live the values of the Boldt company, we can't provide the service that our customers are really buying. They're really buying the service that brings that building out of the ground.
Okay. Interesting you said live the values. What role do values play in leadership at the Boldt company for you?
Values in leadership are about aligning. So we have 6 or 7 different offices across the country. Any point in time, we could have tons of different projects going on across the country. So you have to make sure that you have some consistency in the how and the why.
Okay.
Values give you the how and the why. Some of the values that we talk about currently we talk about, if you're familiar with Lencioni, hungry, humble, people smart. And then we also talk about accountability, reliability, and having grit. If we talk about those things with all of our leaders and our employees, then we have a unified vision about who we are and how we do what we do.
Grit's an interesting term. Mm-hmm. Talk about grit.
Grit. And this is a fairly new one that we've just kind of coalesced around that term, and we're still working with it a little bit. The construction industry is a tough industry. And you have setbacks and disappointments as in any industry. But our whole business cycle is based upon projects. Dave Kiewit, our president, says we do 2 things. We get work and we do work.
We get work and we do work. Okay.
So I do take that to the HR world and say we get people and we build people, because it's about acquiring and building their talent in a way that fulfills them personally so that they can do what's important to them in their lives. But in the process, they're growing their capabilities, thereby building the organization. So all those values kind of fit into that piece. But grit specifically, grit is that tenacity, that ability to have a tough conversation with an owner of a project where they're not happy with something, dust yourself off, get back up, and go out and wow them. It is in every role in the organization. You can think about setbacks and disappointment, and it's about having that intestinal fortitude to move forward and keep pushing through that and find that success you're looking for.
As a leader in the organization, how do you get employees with grit?
Meaning, how do we find them, or how do we know if we have them, or
how do you find them? How do you know if you have them? How do you instill grit in the employees you've already got that might be gritless?
Gritless, that's real. That's real. That's a good question, and we are on that journey to figure out how to make that identifiable, tangible, so that you can actually make sure you've got that. And we've had some situations happen recently where like, that was the missing ingredient, that grit. When someone is put in a position with way too much work to do and way too much to accomplish and not enough time to do it and limited resources, and instead of leaning into it, they go, I'm out. So that's gritless. That's an example of gritless. The people that get energized by the challenge, that you see them actually come to life and be enthusiastic because they've got to lean on that grit. And again, intestinal fortitude, tenacity. If you talk to my two sons, they'll tell you that is mom's superpower, is tenacity. She can always find a way through. And so what we've tried to do is figure out, well, what does that look like? You know, it's a really good question. What does it look like? What does it mean? A lot of behavioral-based interviewing
Sure.
when we're on the talent acquisition side. You
For
know,
for people who might be listening and don't know, what do you mean by behavioral-based interviewing?
Sure. So I'll say the old-fashioned interview was, you know, tell me what you want to be when you grow up. Tell me what you want to do. What was your this, that, and the other thing. Behavioral interviewing really focuses on what's already happened. I think about it as really being able to make people feel very comfortable talking to you. Get them to talk to you by talking to you about things they know. Don't worry about having the right answer, the perfect answer. Talk to me. So it might be, Dale, tell me about a really tough situation that just felt like hell when you were in it. But then when you look back, you think, ooh, I learned a lot. I really grew. And then you give them some time to pause. You know, there's a tendency to want to respond right away.
Right.
Give them the time to pause, and then they tell you a story. If you become good at behavioral interviewing, they will tell you stories, and they will tell you things they never intended to tell you. And that is where you figure out, okay, do they have the grit? Do they have the perseverance? Do they have a sense of humor? Some roles, you really need to have a sense of humor in order to let things bounce off and move forward. Are they very rigid in their expectations of process and protocols and procedures? Or can they be flexible and work in an ambiguous environment where things are not always as clear? And behavioral interviewing, I feel, gives you the best chance to understand who someone really is instead of the traditional questions, you know, what do you want to do at 5 years?
So I'm hearing who the person is just as important as technical skills when you're interviewing.
Mm-hmm. It's almost cliche at this point, hire for fit and train for the role. And that, I think, is getting more and more true. I just think over my career, what was important early in my career, what's become important later in my career, and that evolution. But now I talk to students coming right out of college, and sometimes I think like they are where I should have been at that point in the sense that they know the environment they want to be in. Now, of course, and I say this having a 26-year-old and a 24-year-old, so recent college graduates, that beautiful idealized state coming out of college where you've got all the answers and the world is a utopia and you can find exactly that fit. Now, they haven't quite knocked that off yet, but that energy is wonderful and it's great. But very often they're focused on the culture they want to be in. I didn't think about culture coming into my first role out of college. I was focused on what skills can I learn? Which role is going to be best for me to learn as much as I can to build Holly and then take that forward into my career. I wandered off track there a little bit. Sorry.
No, you're talking about the importance of that cultural fit, the hire for fit, train for the skills.
Yeah. So what we're finding is we have had some situations where perhaps we've hired an employee that didn't have all the skills that they purported to have as you're bringing them in. That happens. But typically when we do have a miss, now it depends on our group and our operation, but if there's a miss, it is that fit that hasn't worked. What I'm trying to dig into now is making sure someone actually understands who they are and how they fit. What do I mean by that? A lot of times, as we go through life, we continue to discover ourselves, who we are, what's important to us, what makes us tick. But I think we can all look back and think, oh, I've changed, or what I wanted there, or what I thought I wanted, and what I really wanted weren't quite the same.
And I certainly hope I've changed.
Yeah, exactly. I can think of a couple of situations where we brought some wonderfully talented people into the organization that thought they were going to be really comfortable in a place that was a little ambiguous, a little messy, where we're building the process, we're building the tools. And they found that they were actually much more comfortable in a place where all the rules are written. And not that they didn't have higher level thinking, they certainly did. But the fact that things were so situational was very messy. And this industry is like that. We do a healthcare project. It's going to be different than a power project. It's going to be different than an industrial project. And all of those nuances, come back into all the corporate operations and how we support the fields and our operational units.
So what happens? You hired the person, and recruitment's a difficult process. You hire the person. It turns out they're not a great cultural fit. They thought they'd be good. It sounded like they'd be good in an environment with ambiguity. It turns out they're not good. Now what?
Well, as is always the answer, it depends. It depends. There are times where the first thing you have to do, and we've got some nice process here, really encouraging managers and employees to stay connected with each other. We've got some formal processes in that first 6 months. One of them is where HR actually sits down with the employee, has them do kind of a self-reflection, and then facilitate a conversation with the manager to try to ensure that they're synced up. So that's one space where we can kind of bring to a surface that there might be a disconnect.
Interesting.
As a manager, and when I'm coaching managers, I focus on that connection, staying really close to people early on. And when something seems amiss, talk about it. Courageous conversations. I will probably have and will spend the rest of my career talking to people about lean into those tough conversations, because the next one's much tougher if you don't have the first one. I remember a gentleman that I hired when I was at Society, and he was an internal candidate, Oshkosh graduate, great guy. And I had done an assessment. I can't remember the name of the assessment that we used to use at this point. But in his assessment, and I had mine, and I'd kind of compare them to see how they looked, and sense of urgency was one of the scales, 0 to 100. And I'm somewhere around 90. He was somewhere around 9. And I looked at that and I thought, ooh, this could be a real issue for us. And so I thought, well, I can just see how things go, or I can have the conversation before I even hire him.
Right.
You could say that was a courageous conversation. It wasn't tough. It wasn't difficult at all. I just said, hey, Ryan. I said, whoops, Ryan, named you. But I said, Ryan, I asked him a number of behavioral-based questions. I couldn't get to where I felt comfortable.
To urgency.
Right. So I just turned it around. I said, I want to show you something. Explained the tool and showed him his and showed him mine. And I said, I think that might be an issue. It was never an issue.
Go on.
And the reason was, he looked at me and I said, is that really who you are? He said, yeah. I said, well, this is really who I am. And I said, what do you think? He said, I think that's okay. And he said, I know what you need. And we found ways of handling it. He never missed a deadline. And we would joke about it. It was like this open joke between the two of us. But the point is, because we had a conversation early on about the conflict we could have with me having a high sense of urgency and him being much more casual, that would have been a problem. It never became a problem because we had the conversation early before it could become one and fester. So if you fast forward to, you've already hired somebody and now all of a sudden there's a conflict, it's having that conversation early. Something as simple as, people are much more casual, I think, now than in the past about something as simple as start times.
Right.
So I've seen a manager, probably closer to my age, I have to admit that at this point, but closer to my age, being very frustrated with an intern or a new hire that is very casual about their start times.
Right.
But for whatever reason, it's important to the manager. So the conversation goes something like this to the manager is, why is that important to you? And then you vet it out. It's like, okay, there's good business reason. In construction, if you're starting a project in the morning, start time.
Right.
Other fields, start time doesn't have to be start time. Have you talked to that employee about this? And there's a tell every time I know if it's happened or not. It said, well, they should know. And every time I hear they should know, that means you haven't talked to them yet. So having that conversation, and it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable. But once you've had it, then everybody knows what the expectations are. And that's kind of the point. It's all about the expectations, knowing what each other's expectations are and talking through them so that you understand them. There have been situations in my career where I've seen a situation where you have those conversations and the employee says, I don't want to meet those expectations. All right, now what are we going to do? There's a phrase.
But then you can have the conversation.
You can have the conversation. You can work through it. I've had those situations, and you talk about this idea of slow to hire, fast to fire.
Yes.
Or hire fast, fail fast. Hire slow, fail fast. And there's some truth to that. I've I've hired people that in the end, great people, but the fit wasn't right or something wasn't clear. And I can think of 2 situations where they actually discovered things about themselves. They presented themselves accurately and appropriately in the interview process. But once they're actually in the soup, they're like, oh, that's what that meant. This is not comfortable. This isn't feeding me. Let's talk about that. Let's see, can we do anything to make it better? Or do we just need to recognize that it wasn't the best fit? And it's
part ways and move on.
Right. And it sounds like I'm being very casual about this. And I feel quite the opposite. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about people's decisions that will make huge impacts on all aspects of their lives. You don't want to have a hire that doesn't work out. They don't want to be in that position either. So we take it very seriously, but it's still going to happen from time to time.
How do you do that? How do you balance the I want to be compassionate to this person with the I need to respect the needs of the organization?
Oh, that's a great question, Dale. I do think there's a certain amount of compartmentalizing that we have to do to be able to manage some of that. I have had to do, anybody in HR has had to go through and lead multiple layoffs, for example. You've got to balance that out. And once you have a tough business decision, then you bring the compassion into the how and make sure you're providing caring, successful transition plans in that place. But when I'm trying to balance out those 2 pieces, it is about compassion's the right word. It's not sympathy. Where I see managers get hung up, they get hung up on the sympathy. Just had a conversation. I don't want to do it now. It's during the holidays. Well, what favor are you doing for that person who's so miserable right now that they can't get themselves unstuck, but they're not being successful? We have started talking about nice versus kind. Nice is letting that person continue to be in that role, continue to get that paycheck. But what are the consequences of that? You know, I know that by the time I'm aware of a performance problem, I'm the last one to know.
And they're aware of the performance problem.
Yep. They're aware of it most of the time. Every so often not, but most of the time they are. But everybody around them is. And what they're seeing, all of those other individuals see that being tolerated. Well, why should I bust my backside? Why should I work so hard? They're getting paid about what I am, and they're not doing half of what I'm doing. It creates this really downward cycle. So if you're nice to that person, you're definitely not being nice to everybody else. You're hurting the organization, and you're hurting every one of those other employees. If you're kind, you lean into your discomfort, make the right decision, do it as compassionate a way as possible. And everybody around sees that too. They see that you have dealt with a performance issue.
So you dealt with a hard decision, but you did it in a compassionate way.
Right.
So you made the difficult call, but
exactly
you did it as with as much compassion as you
and
could.
the compartmentalizing comes when you have to recognize that others may not see that as at all as you have. You've got to be able to look yourself in the mirror and look at your heart and your mind and feel that you have been ethical, you've been appropriate, you served the right needs of all parties. And know that 90% of the people out there will probably just say, well, I've been called things I probably shouldn't repeat publicly. But no,
you and I both.
Yes, but people will come to their own conclusions, and you have to find a way to be okay with that. Some of the leaders I've seen struggle the most are the ones that their need to be people pleasers, their need to be liked is so high that they can't make tough calls. And what they end up doing is they end up telling different people what they want to hear instead of being consistent and congruent in who they are and in their message.
And that's creating huge problems in the organization. Mm-hmm. And what I heard you say, if I got it right, is you think about what's ethically correct, you think about what's good for the organization, you think about the compassionate way to do it, and you balance those together, and then you're figuring out, are you okay with it? And as long as you're okay with the answer, then onward.
And you trust others. I mean, you don't do these things in isolation. One of the true blessings I've had with the Boldt company is a couple of peers that I have great respect for, and it's just super easy for us to bounce ideas and thoughts of each other and trust each other. It's okay to have that second view, to challenge. I encourage it. When I bring people into my team, I always insist that their people have the intestinal fortitude to say, no, Holly, you're taking us in the wrong direction. Now, proving to them it's a safe thing to do, that takes a little more time, but I always make sure to talk to them about it.
And now, a few words about some of the programs and services offered by the UW-Oshkosh College of Business.
Students in the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh MBA Executive Program get a first-hand look at global business in action during a 10-day international study tour, visiting 2 countries and exploring diverse cultures around the world. Rated one of the most impactful elements of the executive program, cohorts have toured top-tier businesses in Accra, Ghana, Beijing, China, Nagasaki, Japan, Panama City, Panama, Seoul, South Korea, Stockholm, Sweden, and more. Be part of something bigger than yourself and experience education beyond classroom walls. Connect with an MBA advisor today by emailing mba@uwosh.edu to learn more about the MBA Executive Program and upcoming international study tours. That's mba@uwosh.edu. It's time to achieve more.
Talk about that. Strikes me that's hard to get people to the point. Let me ask the 2 parts. Why is it important to you that your direct reports would look you dead in the eye and say, Holly, you're wrong? Don't you want a lot of people that are, aren't you the smart and the genius and they're supposed to do what you say because you got all the answers?
Not at all. I am one piece in the puzzle. I'm just one piece in the puzzle. When we hire others in the team, there's a specific, more than one typically, attribute and skill set and perspective you're asking them to bring to the table. I can't be what they are. I cannot be my total rewards director, who's an expert in that space. I know enough to be dangerous. I've done enough in that time, but I hired her to be the expert there. If I'm not going to trust her to lead that space, I shouldn't be leading.
Right.
My labor relations director, same thing. He is an expert in that space. He's built his entire career there. I know enough to be dangerous, and I know how to guide him. I know how to lead him, but I want him to lead that area. So if I expect them to really be able to speak to what their areas need, I can't be the one that thinks I always have the answers.
So I'm hearing you're the big picture, the strategy connection. Here's where we're trying to go in HR, but you let them take responsibility for and tell you what the right answer is when it gets to some of the specifics.
Right. And also creating a culture where, so I have an HR leadership team that includes those individuals, a vice president of talent strategies, which covers recruiting and organizational design and development, and then also an HR business partner director that oversees those positions in the service center. Nothing is off limits in our group. Okay. Anybody can talk about any of the other areas of the function.
Even if it's not your area.
Yeah, it's not territorial, it's not siloed. And so it's not just flat, but it's squished. Maybe that's a better word.
Squished.
Squished. Yeah,
I've never heard that as an organizational structure question.
Just came up with that one.
It's good. Patent that one.
Yeah, there you go. I don't think I'll make much. But you need multiple views and values. We get so hung up in our own mind that we can't see how something looks to somebody else. It's just natural. We all have bias. And I think about, there was a time I chose to build a new PTO policy.
Okay.
At my last organization. We'd had very traditional vacation, sick leave kind of thing, and that didn't feel right for that organization. So I put together a PTO program, and I've been working on this forever, right? It's beautiful. It's perfect. And I took it
It's you. It's got to be great.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. But I had this BFO, blinding flash of the obvious. All right, so I had this BFO.
I like that.
I think somebody else needs to look at this. So I did go to my boss, of course, but before that, I went and grabbed a couple of other employees and said, hey, this is confidential. Not sure we're going this way yet, but would you take a look at something I've written? Tell me what you think, and tell me what you think I'm saying. I learned so much from that experience because what I thought I was saying and what they were hearing weren't the same in some cases. So I was able to refine that based upon that feedback. I've tried to take those lessons forward in everything I do. Now, there are times when you just have to be the guy. You just got to make the decision. But if you're trying to make an organization flat or squished, I think I might use that a little bit. You've got to make sure everybody feels safe coming to you. And that's by inviting their opinion, doing something with their opinions, having them as a part of the dialogue. Now, honestly, that's super easy for me with my direct reports. We've got the right chemistry, we've got the right team, and it's a very young team in terms of how long we've been together. We just hired 2 new HR coordinators in the team, one last week and one this week. And I sat down with both of them on Tuesday, and I told them the same thing. You see something, you want to, why are we doing it that way? I want you to say it out loud. I want you to say it out loud. I said, if anybody tells you because we've always done it that way, well, let me know that too. We don't have that much in our team, but we have that in the organization. I want them to be able to share what their experience is coming into the team, coming into the organization, so we can make it better for the next people to do both. And they're going to be able to see things that don't make sense that we can't see because we've been doing it too long.
So you told them that.
Yeah.
Still feels to me like it's scary to look the boss dead in the eye and say, Holly, I think you're wrong on this, ma'am.
It absolutely is. Can I tell a story?
Sure. We love stories here.
All right. So here's a story that happened when I was at Society. And this is Bobby that I'm talking about. So hopefully he's okay with it. We had an underwriting meeting. This was when I was leading commercial underwriting. And I don't remember exactly what the topic was. What I thought I was doing was generating motivation and enthusiasm. We were doing well, but we weren't quite hitting goal.
Okay.
So, that's what I thought I had done. I still remember her walking, and there's nothing shy or timid about Bobby, and I love that. When she came into my office later that afternoon, I could tell she was just a little bit uncomfortable. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, I want to talk to you about something. I said, right. And she said, when we had that meeting today, she said, I felt like you were my Asian mom. Help me with that. And she said, Holly, when I would go home with a B+ or an A-, it would be, why isn't it an A or A+? She said, that's what I felt like. Like, oh. And I know I tend to have higher standards, and I don't apologize for that, but at the same time, I don't expect perfection. What I did was I thanked her. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with this yet, but thank you for having the courage to come and tell me. It was probably one of the first times she maybe tested she wasn't consciously testing, but does Holly really mean tell me when I'm wrong? And I thought about it overnight, and the next morning, and we were probably not quite 100 people at that point, and I just had a 15-minute hallway conversation. And I brought everybody together and I said, I need to tell you what happened yesterday. So I shared with them that Bobby had come to me, given me this feedback, and I apologized. I said, we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. I said, my intention was to say, we're doing a great job, and I know we're going to hit our goals. You're doing great work. Said, what I understand you heard was, not quite good enough. And I said, I apologize because that is not what I wanted you to take away from the conversation. And I publicly thanked Bobby for bringing that to me.
So you're okay standing up in front of your direct reports and saying, I missed the mark on this.
I screwed up. Yeah, sometimes you'll hear people say, sometimes it feels like we're looking for perfection. And I'm not looking for perfection. I just want us to make different mistakes tomorrow than we made today. And I usually follow that up with, if you want the list of my mistakes today, I can give it to you. You witnessed one of them. So, I mean, we all are human. We make mistakes. It's not about perfection. It is striving to get better. I do believe in that.
Let's not make the same mistake tomorrow.
Right.
That's interesting. Good. You talked about next generation in terms of more of a focus on culture when they're applying for a job. Some folks think of the next generation as not sort of having the work ethic and not being as good as the previous generation. Thoughts on the next generation?
First of all, I think that theory is kind of crap.
Okay.
In my own opinion. I think
you could be a little less subtle here and just tell us what you think.
I could be a little more direct. I think every generation has thought about that, about either the one that follows them or the one after that. It just takes different shapes and different words. Every generation, every group of people is a product of their life experiences and what we built them up to expect. And that's what you end up dealing with. When I came out of college, it was probably 3 or 4 years before I figured out all college did for me, which is big, was teach me how to learn. It didn't give me all the answers that I thought I had the day I walked across the stage. It took a little bit to develop the humility. And I think that's a very natural cycle that we go through. I think there are differences in expectations, and I'm going to pick on one of my sons. I could probably pick on both of my sons. Their expectations for what life balance is different than what I've seen in the past, and it's certainly different than who I am. I think of family work balance or whatever life is outside of work. I think of that as a long-term picture. There can be periods of time where everything's skewed business and times when things are pretty skewed life and family. But overall, it all balances out. And I know that if I'm committed to my organization and if life kicks me in the head, the company will be there for me just like I've been there for them. I truly believe that. Seems to be a little bit more of a sense of wanting a perfect schedule and a perfect balance right now today. And by the way, I'll take less money if it'll give me less time to work. I mean, that's a fascinating difference. I don't think it has anything to do with work ethic. I don't think it's fair to describe different generations as lazy. It's just a different way of looking at it. And I think in any group of people and any generation of people, I always say that I know people that are 40 and still act like they're 14. And I've known 14-year-olds that act like they're 40. So I don't think it's as simple as an age or a number. But there are common experiences each generation works through that shapes them. So I understand that too. But I just don't think it's fair to say any generation is lazy.
And what I'm hearing is that there may be a difference in terms of how they approach work-life balance and the relative importance of that relative to money. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make it better or worse. Mm-hmm. It's just different. It's just different. And I think one of the really exciting challenges we have at this point, and sometimes what I find exciting, others don't, is how do we do that? How do we build organizations and environments that fill the bucket for all those different people? Right.
And sometimes it's no. Sometimes it is no. I'm sorry. Receptionist still needs to be at the front desk if you've got an in-person receptionist. I can't have you working from home. Sorry, that's the gig.
Right.
So some of what we have to do is really coach people through, here are your opportunities. These are the choices you get to make, and this is what goes with it. There's a cost to every decision we make. There's a price for every choice we make.
So you can be the receptionist, and if you don't like that gig, well, then maybe we can help you find another gig within the organization, but these are the constraints associated.
It's like when people... There still tends to be thinking that if I'm going to advance in my career, the only way I can do it is by managing people. And I don't know what the numbers would be, but I think if you'd ask a few managers that thought that, do you really like the managing people part? There are a fair number would say, no, not at all. So there are ways for us to build career paths and job families that allow people to grow, be successful, grow their economic side of their needs, and not have to manage people. We get into these tracks of thinking about you have to do this, you have to do that. I think the fun and joy, I guess I would say, that we have as leaders is being able to figure out, how do we solve that problem? How do we find ways for people to feel successful, feel valued, feel like they're doing things that are important to them and that work, but there's still the choices. So managers, for example, coming back to that, you do have a price to pay. If you want to be everybody's friend, don't be a manager. Just don't. If
it won't work.
If my highest need was to be liked, it would drive me nuts. It would be very, very difficult. Now, I like to be liked. I want to be friends with everyone, but you've got to be knowing of yourself a little bit what the price is. I've had different situations with people wanting to get into perhaps executive levels of leadership, but they only want to work from this time to this time, and you can't get a hold of me at night, and I can't be available on weekends, and I can't travel. It's like, well, these are all the things that go with, there's a price to pay to become an executive.
So it's back to your courageous conversations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you want this is the cost to get there. Right. Is it good or bad? And I'm hearing that you're saying leadership may not be for everybody, and as an organization, you got to find a way to help them figure out what's a good spot for them that may not involve leadership.
But I'm going to talk on the other side of my mouth now, because everybody's a leader.
Go on.
At the essence, everybody is a leader of self.
Okay.
We need to lead ourselves in a way that helps us meet our needs. But by doing that, we actually influence those around us. So we never get to kind of opt out of leading because we have to lead ourselves. It's when you choose to lead others that some of those prices come into play.
All right. How did all this happen? You clearly have a fairly refined, well thought through perspective on leadership. You've analyzed this. You are very thoughtful about this. And I know you got an MBA from Oshkosh, which
that must have been what did it.
Which we'll give that all the credit. But being realistic, what's been your life journey? What's happened in life that has given you these insights into human nature and leadership? How did you learn this stuff? I'm sure it wasn't just reading a book.
No, although there's been lots of those that you read.
What are you reading now?
You read and apply. Actually, I'm not reading right this minute. I took a break over the Christmas break, so I haven't picked anything up. I do have a book. What is that called? It's on People of the Lie. It's an older book. It's a psychological book dealing with truth and this idea of there being one truth or your truth and my truth. So I just started it.
Sort of a cultural relativism kind of question.
Yeah. So it's very different than I typically would read.
Okay, let's go back. What has made you the leader? How did you get these insights? How does this happen?
I think it sounds simple, but it's experience and it's also awareness and being present. But I'll start with something that's very simple. My mother, it's not simple, it was very hard actually, but my mother is a single mother.
Okay.
When we were very, very young, I'm the eldest of three. The eldest part's probably not shocking, but I'm the eldest of three, and my mother was a single mother in the late 60s at a point where that was really looked down upon. The church ostracized her, the culture ostracized her, and she's
divorced.
Divorced. He died shortly thereafter, but he was divorced.
Yeah.
And she was physically beaten, as was I.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, but I'm not. And,
go on.
And the reason is because all these experiences build us into who we are. And I'm not saying that built me into who I was, but it's just one little block along the way. Because what I witnessed was my mother trying to keep basic needs met, trying to keep a roof over our head, trying to keep us fed. We still joke that her motto was next paycheck, whether it was shoes or school supplies, next paycheck, because we were living paycheck to paycheck. She was an RN, but was struggling to raise 3 small kids by herself. And there were so many times when I saw different things. I still remember her trying to buy a car. And we'd been at this Buick dealership, a big old black Buick station wagon. And she found what she wanted, everything, and the salesman at that time, looked at her and said, "That's great, sweetie. When's your husband going to come in to take care of this?"
Ouch.
We didn't buy that car.
I'm not at all shocked.
And the dressing down my mother gave that man, I'm like, oh, it was scary. But I saw this strength in her to not really take a lot of flack, and I saw a strength in her to persevere. She made career changes. So she, as a nurse, your schedule's really tough. She made career changes in order to raise her family and to try to get a little bit more financially solid. There were a number of things I saw in her. There was a day when we lived in a ranch house and tornado sirens went off. It's northern suburbs of Chicago,
okay.
Northwestern suburbs of Chicago. So that was a thing that happened. And we didn't have a basement. So there was one corner of her bedroom that we would all go to. And she had like this card table there. So my brothers and I, our dog, a cat, and my mom are all crouched in this corner. And you could hear the tornado. I mean, this wasn't just a warning. You could hear the tornado. It actually destroyed my elementary school. I wasn't in elementary school yet, but it destroyed the school. And I just remember looking at her, and there was this sense of calm and this sense of control. Now, it was probably the duck, the feet underneath the water while she was calm on top. And I just remember thinking, I want to be that person that people can look to when the world's going to hell. I wanted that strength. So I know that was a key piece of who I became because I admired that strength in her and the tenacity, the ability to persevere and pull things forward. But then I think it's just a matter of cumulative experiences.
Thank you for telling that story.
My pleasure. But it's just cumulative experiences and being present and trying to understand what's happening at the time. Now, I can give you tons of experiences where I only figured out after the fact what it taught me or what I should have picked up on. So I'm not saying I've always
been there, done that.
Oh, yeah. The list is long. The mistakes are long. But I can also tell you that there have been situations where I tell myself, because of past experience, when things are really tough, this is a moment. This is a moment in time, and I am growing through this, and I need to make sure others can be growing through this, and we're going to be better on the other side. So I have a very strong natural sense of positivity. I say I have a propensity to be happy. That's just who I am, and I choose to be that way. But I think it's a lot of those different experiences, coming through them and figuring out that you were able to help somebody else through them.
Okay.
Figuring out that you're able to grow through them, and that the sky didn't fall, even if you thought it was falling at the time.
We're still okay.
Yeah, we're still okay. But I guess on the leadership piece itself, here's a story for you. The first time I had to do a termination, I was given zero training, zero help with it. Good luck with that. And it was
thrown into the deep water.
Yep, totally. And I'm kind of a deep pool person anyway, but
you got a little tenacity and grit.
Just a little bit. But I remember being scared to death. I've never done this before. And I worked with an attorney to put together a separation package. First time I'd done that, of course. But I had no preparation for this conversation I was going to have. But somehow I knew I just had to lead it. And I was on the HR side. It wasn't somebody reporting to me. And this woman had, I think, 6 children. And one was months old. And they were responsible for supervising a line of about 50 people that would be entry-level, minimally skilled. It's a food plant, kind of tough,
right.
Tough kind of situation. And we had coached her, we'd provided her with a lot of help, but she just wasn't being successful. She could not get people to follow her.
Right.
And it just had to be resolved. Her husband was stay-at-home dad. So I knew when we did this, she did not have an income past the severance. So it was really tough. And this was a family-owned company, so there was a lot of compassion anyway. And it was tough, and she wasn't happy, and she called me everything you'd think of, and that's how you go. She called me, I don't know if it was 6 weeks later, 2 months later, and she called me and she told me, Holly, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. Now, this is a gift for someone very young in their career doing their first termination. And I said, help me understand that. And she said that she was stuck. She knew she wasn't being successful, and she just couldn't do it. She couldn't find the time raising 6 kids. They had a farmette too, I think, on top of it, to try to look for another job and do the job she had here, because it was a long-hour gig. And she said, you helped me get unstuck, and I just landed this job, and it's going to be awesome.
Cool.
So I tell that to people when they're going through their first termination, because you don't know, sometimes when you're doing that, you're actually helping somebody put their feet on another path that's going to be so much better for them. Not always, but that's part of the compassion, and that's part of how you self-soothe. And I always make sure to follow up with the people that are doing the terminations afterwards, because nobody realizes, unless you've been in those shoes, how hard that is on you. And to this day, I tell people it shouldn't be easy. If I don't lose some sleep the night before and the night of a separation, then I shouldn't be doing it, because I've lost sight of the impact good, solid business decisions are making on people's lives.
How do you balance those? In the military, sometimes they talk about you need to focus on making sure the troops have dry socks, relationships. And sometimes you need to make damn sure you take that hill, business outcomes. How do you balance those two?
I wouldn't say I've perfected that. I think it's about being present and conscious and talking to people, because you very often have to do both at the same time. Very often that is the case. I remember a situation with a team in a prior life. It wasn't my team. I think there were 9 people on the team, and there was this pretty toxic culture. And as we started looking into it, we had a manager that probably was over promoted getting into a manager role. So she was
Right.
struggling a little
It
bit.
happens.
So, yeah. And so I was trying to help her with it and build her abilities as we went through it. And there was one particular individual, but as we dug into it and we'd coach, we'd pip, we found there were really 3 individuals. And we'd been working at this for like, let's say 9 to 12 months. And I remember talking to the president at the time. He said, Holly, what do we do? We're not getting to the course, the heart of this. I said, you know what we really need to do? And he said, what? I said, we need to terminate all 3 of those individuals at the same time. We're talking about 33% of the capacity of the function. And he looked at me, he said, I think you're right. He said, do it. I said, you know, the manager's going to freak out. Yep. I said, but I've got her. So sat down with her, talked to her about it. She reluctantly agreed. And then I still remember orchestrating the how, because we did them all simultaneously. But the next thing we did was the compassion. This is where the balance comes in. We did the tough thing. I'm trying to support the manager. But then we sat down with her remaining team. And I said, I know this is tough right now. I know it feels like you don't have enough time to be able to get all the work done. I said, here's what I'm going to tell you. And I said, you're going to be surprised what the elimination of that toxicity is going to do to your productivity. I said, but we've already got the ads ready to go. This is back in the print days when you actually advertised via print.
Right.
We've
called the newspaper.
We've got the ads ready to go. We're going to start recruiting immediately. And I said, and if you need to teach me how to, it was a billing team. I said, if you need to teach me how to do billing so that you've got more capacity, I'm here for you. I'll do it.
So you were willing to take one on the chin for the good.
Yep. And the manager was doing the same thing. And just that message, not me, not that I was all that important, but just that there was a caring message and that we will do this as a team and we will be stronger on the other side of this. And delivering that in a convincing way made a difference. They were still scared to death. 5 business days later, one of the ladies caught me in the cafeteria and said, Holly, you're not going to believe this. We're getting more work done. I'm like, well, of course you are. You know, all the chitter chatter and all the backbiting, all that's gone. And the stress is gone. And it, of course, it sent ripples through the organization. Nothing like that had happened before. That was a fairly small organization at that point. But that's part of the balance. Part of the balance when we've had to do layoffs at different times, and I worked very hard to try to avoid those by not overhiring on the front end.
Right.
I went through a period where we hired it seemed like it was 600 people that we had to hire for plant production. It probably wasn't quite that high. And for a very large customer, which I won't name, but a customer that tends to make you the tail to their dog. And then 6 months later, 9 months later, they drastically reduced orders. So now you're overstaffed and you have to reduce. Right. And I always thought that strategically we could have handled that a whole lot differently. So I worked very hard to not put us in that position if we can. But when you're meeting with people, when you're actually doing the terminations, sometimes it's taking care of the details, but also providing the caring. And when we do have to do things like that, I try to make sure we have outplacement ready. So they've got an outplacement counselor to talk to right now. I don't do Fridays. Fridays give people a whole weekend to stress and worry and overthink. I want them to have resources the next day that they can talk to. When they're wondering about their health insurance, they're wondering about their 401k, whatever it is, I want them to be able to get those answers the next day. So instead of Friday, when it might be easier for the organization, move it to Wednesday.
And so you're focused on clarifying what the organization needs are, but doing it compassionately.
Mm-hmm. But let's go to something higher level. Boldt is this incredibly entrepreneurial organization.
Go on.
A lot of our offices. So I joke that I have the fortune to have joined a 132-year-old billion-dollar startup. None of that makes sense, and I know that. What does that mean? This entrepreneurial nature and spirit is how a lot of our offices have been developed. Let's go after this project. Let's put an office there. Or we think there's a lot of growth here. Let's build this office. Give somebody the office to run, and you go do it. Often without a lot of connection back to Appleton. In some cases, yes, but not a ton. A lot of it was, this is your business, you run that business, which is wonderful. And so, but as a result, we've got 6 or 7 different operations that in the past ran very autonomously. Fast forward, now we're working with a GM, or we're working with a Georgia Pacific. if they're working with our southern operations or our northern operations or national power and industrial operations, they may have a different experience than because of this very entrepreneurial nature. So the startup part of this, I mentioned before we started that this is the first that the organization has taken a strategic approach to building an HR function. But I don't get to build it and then we go get the business. I get to build it while we're rapidly growing and already have $1 billion of business on an annual basis, growing that more rapidly, and have a size and all these habits that have been built up that are super challenging. So how do you make sure you maintain the entrepreneurial nature and allow people to use the entrepreneurial talent in the right ways and try to make some of the other 80%.
But superimpose some structure and some control.
Exactly.
And how do you?
Well, we're still working on that. And it's challenging, but one of the things we talk about is being one Boldt. So trying to help people's identity within their employer be Boldt and not southern operations, northern operations, western operations, what happens.
So make that organizational culture stronger than the subunit culture.
Yes. And that's a work in process. We're not there yet by any stretch, but one of the ways we're doing it is Dave has put together Dave Kiewit is the president at the Boldt Company, and he has put together this. It's a circular model it's really servant leadership. And the idea is that if he is in the center, we have all of these corporate operations, HR, finance, etc. We are here to serve and support the operations where the real work actually gets done.
Okay.
We're kind of into our second year of really talking about that and really trying to make it real. But I think that's part of how we get to that idea of Boldt being bigger than any one operation or any one unit.
Okay.
I'm not sure I answered your question, though. I feel like I wandered off.
No, it's good. You answered it. And now a few words about some of the programs and services offered by the UW-Oshkosh College of Business.
The future of business is data-driven. Employers in every sector need people who can analyze large amounts of data, think critically to understand its impacts, and work with teams to convert insights into actions. The University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business offers a graduate-level data analytics certificate to provide the most current and applicable skills in this area of high demand. In just 9 months, you will learn about the most important strategies, tactics, and methods of analyzing data, and put yourself in a position to advance your career. The Data Analytics Certificate can also serve as a starting point into the MBA Professional Program. Learn about the curriculum, program start dates, tuition, and more by visiting uwo.sh/data-analytics. That's uwo.sh/data-analytics.
Let me shift gears a bit. What was your first leadership role? What was the first job you had or first thing you did where you were in leadership? What did you learn from it?
Well, I was a production leader at Burger King in high school.
And
that was probably...
How'd that go?
You
made burgers?
I made burgers, flipped burgers. I was responsible for managing the shift, managing the cash and all that for the shift. It was interesting because all of a sudden I had a sibling that was on the crew. He left. He decided to go work somewhere else.
That would have been interesting, managing a sibling on the crew.
Exactly. And friends, and peers, and figuring out, yesterday I was one of them. Now today I've got to behave differently. And I can't say I remember a lot of those details, but I'm sure some worked better than others because you're trying to balance those types of pieces. But I probably wasn't as conscious of that at the time. But I liked it. I enjoyed it. I had somebody ask me a similar question one time. They asked me, when did I decide to go into leadership? I thought it was a great question, and I had to really think about it for a bit. And I said, I don't think I consciously decided it. I said, I started noticing people followed. And I felt a duty to them. I felt a responsibility. If someone's going to follow me, I better be worth following.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that was probably my first. But then when I was my first role out of college, I was a commissioned bank examiner with the FDIC. And as you come into that capacity, that space, you're come in at a very low level. You're carrying all the computers and everything. And this was back when they were the size of a sewing machine. We called them lug-alongs. But you had to carry all their supplies in and everything else. Then you did what you were told. And over a few years, as you get your training, you get your experience in place, you get to a point where you're leading the bank examinations. And what's really cool about that model was any examiner could be the examiner in charge. So this week, I'm the examiner. The examiner in charge. 2 weeks from now, you might be. So that was really cool.
You could be the boss or you could be the follower.
Right. So you better pay attention to how you're treating the people working for you on your job, because you're going to be working on their job. Most of us were really good at that. There are a couple that weren't so good at that, but that was the first. And I found myself leading an exam with people that had 30 years of experience. I'm 24 years old. And that was, well, geez, how do I do this kind of thing? And just trying to figure out the whole process.
Both of those, there's a certain balance between being a friend, building a relationship with the, quote, followers, even if they're going to become the leaders next week, and meeting the needs of the organization. Mm-hmm. How did you balance that? How did you figure out, let me rephrase that, how did you figure out how to figure the line of where that being a friend stopped and started? How do you do that?
I didn't figure it out there because it was so fluid, I think, because we went back and forth so much. I didn't figure it out there. I figured it out when I was in my next organization in an HR role and then started managing. And I'm sure I didn't come up with this phrase, but I talk about we can be friendly without being friends. And how do you know when you've crossed that line? You've crossed that line when you can no longer manage someone to their behavior because of the personal connection.
All right.
So if I can't have that tough conversation with you because you keep missing deadlines, Dale, and it's because we're friends outside of the office,
we got a problem.
Crossed that line. Now we're friends and not friendly.
So it's an outcome-driven thing, not a particular behavior. It doesn't say, don't go out and have a drink with them after work, or don't X, Y, or Z, or do X, Y, and Z. It's as long as you can still be the boss.
Be objective. Really.
When you need to, that's okay.
Yep.
That's an interesting way to think about that line. Some people will have the debate about, are leaders born or is it a developed skill? Question one, are you a born leader? The oldest of?
Well, possibly, but my humility is like, I don't want to answer that. I think there are certain tendencies that you're probably born with, but I don't think that.
Would your mother say you're a born leader?
Yeah.
Is your mother wrong?
No.
Okay, so you're a born leader. Yeah. Well, can you learn to be a leader, though, even if you're not a born leader?
I do think you can, because I think you can be a born leader and fail miserably. And there's lots of history.
Well, if you're a born leader, how can you?
There are different types of leaders, right?
Go on.
If you become very autocratic and create environments that are hostile and uncomfortable, I don't care what your revenues are. I don't care what your bottom line became. You failed.
Okay.
All right. So I think, we can all be born with God-given talents and fail to manifest those in a way that's real and really live up to them. What's this phrase? My kids hated it. They're both competitive swimmers and one was a competitive soccer player. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work.
Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work.
So you can have the talent, but if you don't work it, it's wasted. It's lost. That gift God gave you is gone. And I truly believe that. So I do believe you can be taught certain things. Now, I don't think you can turn anybody into a leader. First of all, they have to want it. And They have to want the risk that goes with it.
And some people probably shouldn't be leaders.
And shouldn't
It's not
going
to be right for them.
Right. But I think I honestly believe the human nature is if you have the capability and the desire, you can create the capacity and the ability.
Okay.
So I do think it's possible. There might be some ceilings. You might only get so far. So if you're an extraordinarily introverted person, you might have trouble, no matter what your desire is to lead, with the scale on which you can lead. You can still lead, but the scale on which you can lead.
Because at some point, some charisma is going to be necessary.
You're going to have to get up in front of 50 people, and it's not going to happen.
And if you can't, then...
Yeah. So I think there's probably some limitations, but I do think if the desire and the ability to learn is there, you can build it.
What do you look for when you're thinking of promoting somebody into leadership? What tells you, I think we got a shot?
That's a great question. And we've actually developed a bit more of a formal process around that. We've just submitted a slate of individuals that we are recommending we promote to vice president. And we went through a process that dealt with, now it's Korn Ferry competencies.
Okay.
And then the desired behaviors. We've got desired behaviors from managers, and then another layer of desired behaviors of leaders.
Okay.
And I probably won't all come to the top of my mind right now.
But it's an important distinction. This is the group for managers. This is the group for leaders.
And they're additive.
Leaders are more so than managers.
Yes.
Okay.
And we actually went through a submission process where their current leader had to evaluate them against those competencies, brought it before our executive team, and then we reviewed them and then voted based upon, do they meet these areas. Some of the things I look for, some of them are intangible, but we do go back to, and now it's for all of them, but that humility, that grit, the tenacity, the accountability.
Right.
The willingness to lean into a situation, the willingness to do what it takes. Humility is literally a super important piece that we look at. If somebody doesn't have the humility, they're not going to be a fit.
Right.
When I personally look for someone on my team that I'm going to promote or hire into a higher level than that, I look for them to be nimble, the ability. I look at their experience, and I can get very excited about their experience. But if I'm talking to them about, so these are the challenges we have, so you're out of the behavioral based interviewing at this point, say, these are the challenges we have. What do you think? What do you think about your role? I actually am a little hesitant if they give me the answers too quickly. Because at least from my perspective, when I was being interviewed for the role I'm in, I was asked those questions and I said, I'd love to give you an answer. I'd love to give you a write-up on this is what we'll do and this is step A and this is step B. I said, but here's the thing. I don't know if any of the tools or any of the things I've done that have been successful in the past will work for this organization because I don't know the organization. So somebody that understands they don't have all the information until they get into a situation. So I look for that intellectual curiosity, humility in the sense that I don't have all the answers yet, but I can draw on all these experiences I've had and try to figure out what's going to work here.
And you also did what you said was important, that you'd have a subordinate who'd look you dead in the eye and say you're wrong. Yeah. At some level, you looked the interviewer in the eye and said, fundamentally, you're asking the wrong question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is kind of a nervy thing to do. Well, but you got the job.
Yeah. Yeah. There was some risk there, but it was. And I said, now I'm going to go away from this. And I did. I went away from it. I thought about it. And I thought about what picture could I paint for them, knowing I don't know so much. And so I was able to kind of put together a framework for how I'd go about systematically trying to answer that question and how we would discover it. So that's kind of the approach I took. But going back to someone I select, every person I've ever talked to, I've put them in situations in the interview to try to test if they can push back. Now, I give some grace. It's tough to do that in an interview. It's really tough to do that in an interview. But and I do tell them stories. I tell them stories. I tell them that I am looking for that. So right now I'm looking for an executive assistant. And I tell them flat out, I need you to manage me. And I'm not easy. I know I'm difficult to manage.
Let me give you a heads up.
And we've got, and there's some other resources, but I don't want someone that's going to wait and do just what I ask them to do. I want people that have their own minds and their own creativity. We still got to stay aligned, but I would much rather have to pull the reins back once in a while than have to light a fire under somebody. I mean, I think most of us are that way.
Yep.
I think about it now. I probably would be really poor at managing front line at this point in my career. Because I so enjoy managing people. They have a breadth of responsibilities and they just charge the hill and they know when to come and ask for help.
And the folks that need to be hit with the spurs to get them to do stuff you'd find annoying.
That really, it's at this point in my career, I just don't have the patience I once had for it. Now, if someone doesn't know and they're hungry to learn, I'm in all day.
How important is that ability to have a sort of self-reflection, self-awareness, insight that you just demonstrated? Yeah, I'd be good at this job, but this job,
You mean in terms of people we hire and select? Or
people you hire, leadership?
I think it's tremendously important. I'm still chewing over the question you asked me earlier about how did I develop some of this, and I think it is about having that perspective and insight and being able to take feedback. And I've got two stories. One that tells you I was a little tough to get it, and then another one that was much more positive.
Okay.
But I think having self-awareness in the moment or even after the fact, I think is really important so you can adjust and grow. I would say the day I stop growing is the day I'm cold, because I enjoy learning, I enjoy growing, and I am so far from who I want to be and so far from being perfect. But I think about some of the tough lessons I've learned. When I was in my 20s, I remember people saying, Holly, you can be intimidating. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm 5'3", and I'm a lot tinier than them. I was like, I'm not intimidating. There's nothing intimidating about me. And then after I had my first son, I would drop my son off at childcare. My then husband would pick him up because I'm really bad at leaving work on time. And I'm like, this is going to be a problem. We know it's going to be a problem. So that's what we did.
You do the pickup, I'll do the drop off.
Yep.
This will work.
And then he had to travel, I think it was to England for a week or two. So I had both ends of it. And my office was fairly close to the childcare. So I'm in work mode. I go flying in the front door at that childcare, go in to pick up my son, and the woman caring for my baby has her in his arms, and she backed away from me. And I'm like, oh, that's what they're talking about. It's not stature. It's not being demanding. It's probably a little bit being commanding, and just the energy and the way I would carry myself into situations. I'm like, that's not going to work in every situation. So people told me, but I couldn't understand. I couldn't see what they saw. After that day, though, I could see it all the time. So sometimes it's just being aware. There was a point where I was in my office. I'd been in the company. This was Anchor Food Products. I'd been there, 2 years. And I got myself to a point where I thought, there isn't a problem they can bring me I can't figure out.
I got this. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play.
I was ready to go. And I had a BFO. But what if they didn't even have to come to me for the problem? I was solving problems, but I wasn't giving people the ability to prevent them or solve them on their own. And it was
you were being the hero.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was this huge revelation. It's like, if I can put them in a position to handle this, then we can grow and we can do so much more. And that has stayed with me my entire career. So those moments of awareness that we build on, I think, is how we come to be who we are, whether it's something we're doing well or something we weren't doing so well.
Let's go back to a couple of things you said there. First, the during or after. That if you can, there's a certain awareness and a sensitivity during, but maybe it would be after. So tell me about after as opposed to during. What is that?
After is just you weren't present enough at the time to figure out what was going on. I remember a conversation with a gentleman that I thought a great deal of. Let's get together for dinner. We haven't gotten to dinner for a while. It'd be great. So we're just catching up on all the things. It was probably 2 weeks before I figured out he was trying to figure out if I was interested in buying his business.
It never dawned on you that was
at the time.
Topic of the conversation.
There are, it never even occurred to me at the time. Afterwards, it's like, was that? And then even then, my ego was such that I'm like, no, that couldn't have been what that was. I recently had it confirmed, so that's why I can talk about it now. There was a time where a leader of mine, I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but I figured out about 2 days later, I'm like, oh, I think they were asking me if I'd be interested in moving from being the vice president of HR and moving into commercial underwriting. And I did. I moved from vice president of HR to vice president of commercial underwriting, but I didn't pick up on it at first. And maybe they were too subtle. Maybe I was too dense. I don't know.
So how do you deal with that when you get the awareness after the fact? Mm-hmm. It would have been cool if in the moment you had it, but you didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. That.
Well, the first one, I did not follow up because it was a point in my life where while it was interesting to me, it wasn't the right time.
So it wouldn't have mattered anyway.
Right. But I still was complimented by it. The second one, I went back. I said, "Did I miss a cue there?" Well, I did want to talk to you about something. I said, "Let's have that conversation." So
you ginned it up and.
Yeah, and it's even like the story I told you with Bobby. Afterwards, I didn't have the presence, the awareness at the time to see how I was being interpreted. But when it was pointed out, I could come back to the group and say, I blew it.
The awareness after the fact allows you to manage that if you're willing to own that I missed it. Mm-hmm. Something else you had said, intimidating. I find intimidating fascinating. And you had said, yeah, this isn't going to work in all situations. I don't remember the exact terminology you used. There are situations where intimidating is a good thing?
There are times where you have to hold your ground.
Go on.
You have to hold your ground. And I don't know that I would use the word intimidating because I've never intentionally wanted to intimidate anybody, but I definitely want to let them know that I'm not going to get pushed around. There are times when that's appropriate. If you're doing certain types of negotiations, I've had situations with former employees or even business partners where you just have to let them know that we've gone as far as we're going to go. If we're going to do this, it's going to be this way. And
if they've interpreted you as being intimidating, that's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because sometimes that's
right.
But you need to get it done.
But you can't be a carpenter with the only tool a hammer.
Right.
You can't do that. And
intimidating isn't your go-to move.
No, it can't be. And I actually work now that I have, that I remember being interviewed by Dave, and he said, I get the sense that you could, overpower people, some word to that effect, I don't remember. And I said, yeah, but I was 53 at the time. I said, but Holly at 33 and Holly at 53 are two very different people. I said, I am aware of that, and it's not what I want to do, and it's not what I lead with.
But I can do it if I need to.
If I have to, I do it. Mm-hmm.
And it's good to have that stuff in the can.
You have to have lots of tools.
What question have I not asked you about leadership? What's important about leadership that we haven't bounced into yet?
I think we've bounced into a couple of different things, but I want to bring it back to something you made me think about earlier. This is probably 10 years ago. Yeah, probably about 10 years ago. I was asked to speak to a group of middle school, high school girls about leadership.
Okay.
And they wanted a woman come and talk about leadership. And I thought, all right, what's different than anything they're hearing from anybody else?
Right.
What's the message? And this is before I read Lencioni or anything. And I started thinking and writing about all the leaders I'd worked with, the ones that I'd learned good things from, the ones I learned not to do certain things from, because both lessons are important. And I realized that the thing that I thought was most important, assuming all other things equal, the variable was humility. So it's ironic later to read The Ideal Team Player and talk about humility. And this is what humility means to me, or why I think it's important. I think we kind of think we've got to fake it till we make it.
Okay.
And sometimes we keep faking it
till we're dead.
We make it till we're dead. Yeah. And especially if you have a strong personality and you feel like you've got to fake it till you make it, and you feel like you've got to be seen as a person with all the answers, it becomes impossible to ask anybody else for help. And nobody will come to you and offer it. With humility, it gives you the ability to say, I'm wrong. Help me. Show me. And to me, that's a big piece of humility in action. There are a lot of ways to describe humility, but humility in action is being able to create those spaces. And it's vulnerability. Brene Brown talks about it. But the idea that I'm not perfect. I can give you a list of things I made mistakes on today. And not in a trite way, but in a sincere way, and letting people know that all of a sudden we're all human again. And I used to put myself out there very early in my career. I'm 24 years old. One day I'm working with a teller, then I'm working with a loan officer, and then I'm in front of a board of directors for a bank in my navy pinstripe suit, telling a gentleman who's older than my grandfather that he needs to write off a $500,000 loan. You're scared to death inside. You fake it till you make it.
Right.
There's no question. And there was certainly that part of my career early on where I thought I had to appear to have all the answers. And it wasn't until Actually, after I had my first child, and all of a sudden people figured out that I had life I was trying to balance too, because it always looked easy for Holly. It wasn't easy for Holly, it just looked easy. Then I'm like, oh, we've got to be connected as people. I used to think you checked your life at the door. We've got to bring our whole life to the door. Now, without the distractions, of course, you got to get your crap done. But we've got to be human. And humility and vulnerability, those two come together very closely. So the question I would ask me is, what do I think are some of the most critical pieces of leadership? And there's tons and volumes of books written. For me, those are two very, very important pieces.
And Brene Brown, I'm a fan of Brene Brown's work.
Mm-hmm.
That vulnerability is, what did you take away from Brene Brown?
When I first was exposed to it, the word vulnerability, I was in a situation where I didn't feel it was safe to be vulnerable.
Okay.
So it was very challenging for me to lean into that and be vulnerable anyway. And that was kind of what I took away from some of her stuff. I don't think it was what she necessarily said, but I thought, I need to do this anyway to break through this wall.
She talks about vulnerability.
Yeah,
sure.
She certainly talks about vulnerability, but being vulnerable in a place that it's not safe.
Oh, okay.
So what I took away from my experience and some of her work was I need to create the space where others are safe.
Where others can be vulnerable.
Where others can be safe. Yeah.
And that's part of the values and the roles of what you need to do.
Yeah, and to me, that's really important. You've got to be able to create a space that's safe. Our industry, construction industry, we're all tough. We can take it.
Right.
I mean, my vocabulary is totally different than it was in insurance. But, it's just a different kind of space. But it's been really interesting because our president talks about vulnerability. He's demonstrated vulnerability. And that's when you start making things safe, is when you show that you're willing to be vulnerable.
Related to vulnerability, one last question. Taking care of yourself. How do you take care of yourself?
Not nearly as well as I should.
Well, what do you do that you seem to have somehow figured out how to balance it. You're here today and you seem to be in good shape. Maybe you're just faking that. But
well, I'm not. I'm in good shape. I'm not in the shape I'd like to be in. I would put it that way. But that goes back to, remember I talked about balance being kind of over a longer period of time. One of the things I'm personally working on is consistency in that. Consistency in making sure Holly's taking care of Holly, because it's really easy to focus on my children, people in my life, and my work. It's very easy for me to do that. So I think...
And then you're not doing enough to take care of Holly.
Right. But I think about it, Stephen Covey talks about balance. And if you think about a commercial flight flying from Chicago to LA, it does not go in a straight path. It's a constant correction, a constant adjustment back to center and back to that line. And that's what I'm trying to do with taking care of Holly. So things I do, I did jump into the Peloton thing, so I've got that. But I do yoga.
Cool.
I certainly like to read things that aren't always about business. Spending time with family and friends, of course. I like quiet time because I get peopled out after a while. Yeah. And I've done 2 full marathons. I think I've done 36 half marathons. I'm not doing a lot of active running right now, but those are some of the things I've done. I ski, I cross country ski, so a lot of variety in the things I do. I also quilt, which is the one thing I do where I can actually see progress as I do it. When you're raising a family or when you're helping others grow and develop, you can't see that progress as you go. So quilting gives me something I actually see as I do it.
I understand. I can relate. Working at the university, I teach. Mm-hmm. Did this make any difference? You can wander at the end of the day. I live in the country, live on some land, and I plant trees and I cut down trees. Seems like I should be doing one or the other, but I plant trees and cut down trees, and I cut up trees, and I have firewood, and I fill the barn with firewood. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you can see where there's a row of firewood that there wasn't at the beginning of the day. Yep. That's my quilting. Yep. And I can relate to
just some tangibility to
something
it.
That I can see. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think it might be the most useful thing I do in a day.
I know people really appreciate my quilts, so there's something to that.
There you go. All right.
I had one question.
Sure.
That I thought was kind of interesting. In the earlier part of the discussion, you're talking about kind of surrounding yourself with good people and listening to the good people. Mm-hmm. I've found in more new school settings, that's implied, and I think that at some point you're listening to people too much and you can't own your own vision as a leader, and by the definition of the leader in the classic sense of pioneering a new initiative. In some way, how do you own the direction and still without taking everybody at their face value, kind of the critiques of a democracy in Plato's Republic.
So I'm going to go two different directions with
You can
this one.
reframe that for the podcast if you want. If you want to summarize,
We'll get an answer because
and by the way, I don't know how you want to handle how Bobby came to me. I don't know if we want to tweak that a little bit from a PC
I'll probably put something in there
perspective.
to explain who Bobby is and explain why it's okay for her to use the expression Asian mother.
Yeah, that's. I was trying. I'm like, how do we do this one? But
Yeah.
Coming back to your question, I think a big piece of it is you can own the vision. But as I build my vision, so I've only been with the organization, it'll be 3 years in May. The coming into the organization, understanding what they were looking for and what I saw we could create. Calibration, primarily with my leader, but also the other executive team members. But still, it's Holly's vision to build. It's Holly's vision to drive. And then enrolling people in the vision within the team that existed, but then also hiring people with that vision out there. But it's kind of like the delegation example. I don't have every detail figured out. I've got the big picture. Where their voice is loudest is in figuring out, okay, now let's figure out how the hell to do this. And I think that there's space there. But the other way I want to go with that too is one of the things that we have a challenge with organizationally right now is around what is too many people. We want to be collaborative. We want to be open. But where's the balance so that people feel involved and they contribute and they're able to feel that, but it takes us 6 months to make a 6-day decision. And I think that's a real balance that I don't see a real perfect answer for that. It's something you just keep working through. And we're literally working through that right now organizationally. Positively, it's a good problem to have, and it's a very transparent discussion. When is something Holly's call, and when do we need to bring a committee together to decide how we handle it?
Yep.
It's challenging. It's absolutely challenging.
Absolutely agree. And one of the things I quote teach leaders is that one of the arrows you need to keep in your quiver is, I want you to do this, and the reason is because I said so. And there's times when because I said so is all the answer you get.
We have, I don't know which model this is, but there's the A, B, and C card. And one is I want your input, and one is this is where we're headed, but I still want your input. And the other one is we're just doing it this way, damn it. I think you do have to have that. But on the flip side, one of the ways I measure myself is a whole different track now. But I believe everybody should grow as a leader without any legitimate authority.
Yes.
That you have to learn through influence, relationship building, trust, and being able to impress upon people what needs to be done or be able to explain a vision. And the reason for that is because I think as you get higher, if you don't do that, you lean on your legitimate authority. If I have to pull the C card, if I have to say we're doing it this way because Holly says so more than once a year, then I am not as strong a leader as I need to be.
Absolutely.
You do have to have it.
The arrow's in the quiver,
Yep.
But I sure as heck hope it stays there.
It's the antithesis of my family as I raise them. This is not a democracy. This is a matriarch.
Right.
Be very clear. I want your opinion, but we may not do anything with it.
Or as I explained to my children, it is a democracy. It's just I get many votes.
There you go.
So thank you for listening to this podcast. I look forward to interacting with you on the next podcast.
It's Time is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs in association with Venture Project Studios. Executive producer, Aaron J. Armstrong. Host, Professor Dale Feinauer. Creative Director, Madison Potratz. Director of Photography, Elazar Kloon. Audio and Video Editor, Elazar Kloon. Marketing Strategy, Tara Larson. Social Media, Anwar Mahana. A special thanks to L Creative, Top View Media, Michael Patton, and the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.